This is the Future of Finance.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Future of Finance podcast. I'm George Dyer, and today we have Grant Harrison on the show. Grant is Vice President of Sustainable Finance and ESG at the Trellis Group, where he leads on program development for Greenfin, their annual event aligning the sustainability, investment, and finance communities. It's great to hear his thoughts about what he's seeing in the corporate sustainability space and how it's evolving and how sustainability leaders within companies are reacting to the political pressures around their work. And of course, we talk about how all of this relates back to investors, both asset managers and asset owners, who are working to assess the sustainability performance of companies and what that means for their investment decisions. I encourage everyone to check out Trellis if you are not familiar. Their website, newsletters, and events are all great. It's a wealth of information and a great community in the sustainability space. As always, don't forget to follow the show. Please leave a rating or review. And now, here is Grant. Grant, welcome to the podcast. How you doing?
George, I am going to give you a quantified answer and give you an 8.7 out of 10.
Nice. That's pretty good. It's great to see you. It's been way too long, a couple years maybe.
It has been. Yeah. Lots has changed and a lot is the same, but it's good to see you.
Nice. How's everything going at Trellis?
Trellis is good. I will say for those who are joining in who are maybe wondering what Trellis is, you maybe formerly knew us as GreenBiz Group. We have been Trellis Group for a little over a year, but it's good. More, of course, that I'll expand on, but spending a lot more time on the professional network side of our company and less on the editorial side, but both have continued to grow and are dealing with all the headwinds that all that work in this space are familiar with, but navigating them pretty strongly.
Yeah, I bet. How has that rebranding been going? It's, GreenBiz is around for how long before? It's been well over 10 years or something, right?
Yeah, it started with Joel McCower riding a bike around the East Bay in the 90s, delivering a physical newsletter, which, if I understand correctly, is something made out of paper that people actually used to receive at their house. GreenBiz early 2000s, and I think formally became GreenBiz Group Inc. in the early 2010s. So yes, it's been some time, been around since there was such thing as a chief sustainability officer. But I've been relieved. I'm ready with my spiel always to be like, Trellis Group, before they look away, like, hey, we used to be GreenBiz Group, listen.
Right.
Most people pretty quickly know, so it worked, I guess is what you could say.
Good. Well, it's a great brand. And for folks who aren't so familiar, tell us, a little bit about what you do at Trellis, because I know there's sort of lots of different arms and parts and events and sort of media outlets. So maybe just give us a little snapshot on where you focus.
Yes, the Trellis Group has three lines of business. One is maybe the front door of the business, which is trellis.net, so editorial channel, primarily catered to a person leading a sustainability program at a company, whether that's one person doing it themselves or a small team. Events, so full portfolio, and some of these names might be familiar to your audience. GreenBiz, the eponymous event, kind of core convening for corporate sustainability practitioners in the U.S., and a handful of others that are now being consolidated into one event called Trellis Impact. Under that umbrella are a series of events: Bloom, focused on nature, biodiversity; Circularity, focused understandably based on the title on the circular economy; Verge, all things climate tech; and Greenfin, the event that I lead on sustainable finance and investing, which again, are now part of Trellis Impact, a singular event. The third line of business is the Trellis Network, so formerly known as GreenBiz Executive Network. Used to be kind of one company, one member, peer-to-peer learning network. Now it's unlimited seats, trying to bring in roles from across the company to actually live out what we say in this space a lot about breaking down silos, not just bringing that one person who's tasked with leading sustainability, but all the people in their finance team and procurement team and HR and everywhere else that this touches to actually get on board and galvanize them into action. So I think it's, at this point, haven't checked as recently as I should have on the exact numbers, but we're about 170 member companies. All criteria are billion-dollar plus revenue companies, no service provider roles that participate, so all practitioners of some variety. And there are 10 subgroups within the Trellis Network. So I run the finance and ESG group, but there's groups focused on social impact or strategy for people running companies headquartered in Europe, or circular economy, nature, kind of every subtopic you could imagine in sustainability. So I spend a lot of time on that.
Nice. Yeah, it's an interesting thing about sustainability. It is so multifaceted, and the goal is to integrate it across so many parts of the organization that, when you're running events or media outlets, there are a lot of people to reach.
Yeah.
So on the combined event, this is the first year you're doing it, is that right? Coming up?
Yes,
Yeah.
it is in October, which is usually the placeholder in the calendar for Verge, which is in terms of population, the biggest event. It's usually 4 to 5,000 people centered around the Silicon Valley ecosystem of climate tech founders and venture investors, but also all the corporates who you would probably find at the GreenBiz event as well tend to
Hmm.
join us at Verge. So it's a really big ecosystem event as opposed to an event like GreenBiz that's very focused on the specific role of corporate sustainability lead and their team.
Right.
So GreenBiz can be thought of as like high level strategy setting event of the year. Trellis Impact is meant to be practitioners who actually touch on all those subgroups I just talked about. So all the communities that fall under Bloom, Greenfin, Verge, and Circularity are meant to come and participate in an event setting that's more catered to people who are implementing the work that gets set
Yeah.
by the strategy setters at GreenBiz.
That sounds great. Well, I hope it goes well. It's in Southern California this year, right?
No, this year it is in San Jose.
Oh,
So, and then next year it's going to be in San Francisco.
gotcha. Nice.
And this
Nice.
year I will be showing up just the week before the event happens because I'm going on paternity leave soon for my first paternity leave. So I will be showing up a
Oh,
week before
nice.
Trellis Impact, ready to participate, but very unclear on what's happened in the world for like 2 months. So
Yeah. Well, congrats and good luck with jumping back in there.
yeah,
And I know we talked about this, but I'm bummed the dates conflict with our annual event this year, so we'll make sure that doesn't
that's
happen. But we're on the East Coast, you're on the West Coast, so hopefully that'll work. Nice. Well, so tell us a little bit more about the Trellis network and sort of how that relates to the events. Like, how do you bring folks together outside of the events in that networking community?
yeah. So the pitch for the network in some ways is it's I hear the term thrown around a lot by the members themselves that part of the value is the group therapy element, like
Hmm.
people doing this job in corporate sustainability, and maybe this applies to other subsectors of sustainability, are oftentimes feeling like they're alone in doing the work or are pretty like, slow, low head count, maybe difficulty getting budget to implement what they want. Like it's a somewhat lonely job, and oftentimes it's also not super clear how to do the next step.
Hmm.
So the value of just having this like peer group to benchmark against and get answers on what you do next, because this is not the kind of job you can Google like how do I blank. You really have to know how others are operating in their companies. So we bring people together again under those different subtopics. So in my group, I actually have two groups. One is finance and ESG, and one is only for ESG controllers at Fortune 500 or 1,000 companies.
Hmm.
So more of an invitational group for that role that is a particularly interesting role in maybe the intersection of corporate sustainability and finance, because that is a corporate finance function that is very important for this next stage of sustainability implementation and reporting and kind of rigor that we've talked about in the space for a long time.
Hmm.
You've been in it much longer than me, so you've been exposed to that for quite some time, I'm sure. But yeah, the goal of the group is to bring folks together, usually with an expert speaker that is either someone who's done what they've done and is a good proxy for how to do it, maybe someone who has like a different way of thinking about something, and allows us to have a conversation in a Chatham House rule space where you can say those things that maybe you're not comfortable saying in public because going back to an adage that I've heard from a longtime Greenfin participant, Graham Sinclair, who says to speakers all the time at our events, don't be boring, but don't get fired. So the ability to kind of talk about topics like that are a little more contentious in a comfortable setting is really important. Yeah, the importance of bringing this professional community together outside of ephemeral events that happen throughout the year has always been important, is especially important in a time like this one where the headwinds against the work that we are trying to achieve are particularly strong. The value of having this trusted community to benchmark your work against, to understand how others are navigating a headwind that in some ways is novel, in some ways it's somewhat predictable. I think when we saw a political cycle happening last year, it was like kind of clear which way the winds were turning, but you don't know how to actually maneuver necessarily just because you know what generally is coming. So
Hmm.
we've seen the participation like we meet online. Virtual life is great and can achieve a certain amount, but we also host in-person meetings throughout the year at member company headquarters. So move around from companies, maybe financial institutions in New York. A few of those will host in-person meetings. We'll move across the country until we land at companies like Salesforce or others headquartered where we are locally.
Hmm.
And we usually get 20 to 25 folks together for a day or two for a lot of that element I talked about earlier. The group therapy for sure is a component of that, but also kind kind of practical strategies for what is collectively on the group's mind.
Yeah.
And I get the awesome job of just hosting and being curious and being the connective tissue, and have a very privileged job where I don't have to have the answers.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Do you bring companies together like by sector, or is it kind of a mix generally?
It kind of ends up falling into like who can come and who's local, you know. So like I was at
Yeah.
MetLife a month and a half ago, hosted by their sustainability lead, and there's some element of a draw that you get folks from financial services because we're in New York at MetLife's headquarters, but you get whoever is available and eager to join, which is kind of cool because you end up not getting like a kind of distinctly siloed group of people, going back
Right.
to the whole breaking down silos adage. So there's usually some kind of novel spark that comes out of that.
Yeah. And tell us a little bit more about like the roles. I mean, you said they're sort of broadening as, you're kind of sustainability is getting spread out more across companies. But is it generally chief sustainability officers or sustainability directors? And how like investor relations professionals been increasingly involved in these conversations?
Yeah, the core, definitely the core community is still the, see if they have a CSO, the CSO, or some kind of adjacent role to that.
Yeah.
If someone's lucky, I think the average, based on our survey data of our own network, the average sustainability team at a Fortune 1000 is 4.5 people. Of course, there's no half person, but that's the number we landed on. Um, so yes, the whole point of this kind of moving from the GreenBiz executive network to that single person, single company leading sustainability work to the broader capture was to use this anchor that we have with pretty deep relationships we have with sustainability leaders to reach into their other functions, like you just said, investor relations, or someone else in corporate finance, or someone else who's never heard of a Trellis, doesn't know what GreenBiz is, isn't thinking about this work, to bring them into the conversation. And that has worked to the degree that we're hoping it would. We're hoping more and more that that's the case. But like, I'll find I think there's 190 or so active members in my finance and ESG group, and every meeting I'll see maybe 3 to 5 faces or, Zoom boxes, if they're not so inclined to bring their face, of roles that have no like direct connection to sustainability work. And the hope is that, that person's taking a nugget of information to take back to their job, because, another fun sustainability adage that this is part of everybody's job. And of course it has to be. 4 people at a company are not going to redirect the momentum of a large corporate.
Right.
Whether we know, it's hard to measure exactly what's happening when that person takes this information and set of thoughts and novel connections back to their work, what they're doing with it. But I guess we see that in the broader trends we all observe.
Yeah. Yeah. Tell us a little bit more about like the media side of it and the reporting that Trellis does and how that sort of fits in with the community and the events.
Yeah, so that's actually how I discovered this institution. I was leaving grad school and asked someone who's working in corporate sustainability at a big tech company here in the Bay Area, like, what do I read and how do I get to understand what's happening in this space you're working in? And I was pointed to greenbiz.com at the time, and multiple people said, start at greenbiz.com, figure out like kind of what's happening, and then from there, pivot to where you want to go. I didn't pivot anywhere else. I read here, read the site, and then showed up here. It's been here for 7 years. But it's more focused on, there's like the whole media ecosystem serves different purposes, and within professional business to business media like us, obviously we're serving a very specific profession. But we're not like, our bread and butter is not, for example, X company did this scandalous thing in ESG world. Here's why it's not great. That should be covered. And if X company is doing scandalous things, someone should cover it. That's not our job. Or, on the other end of the spectrum, Y company has reduced the paper that their straw is wrapped in by 2.5%, something that's kind of more announcement oriented and kind of doesn't add up to a good enough so what. So for us, it's really meant to be for the corporate sustainability professional primarily, who needs to understand how someone else in their field is doing their job and doing it well. So lots of case studies, lots of analysis, not a lot of like this just happened kind of news.
Right. Got it. That makes sense. And it's a great resource. We use it all the time at the Intentional Endowments Network, and
Nice.
refer to it in our weekly news roundup a lot, just to sort of get that picture for the investor community of what's kind of happening at the company level. So let's talk a little bit. You mentioned the political headwinds and how you're all navigating that. What are you seeing amongst companies as they, get these pressures around climate action and the like?
Yeah, I mean, the first term that comes to mind is the greenhushing, which, if people are not familiar with that term listening, it's one of the iterations of green fill in the blank. So in this case, not greenwashing, where you're kind of misconstruing what you are doing or kind of falsely representing your green credentials. This is instead hiding your green credentials or not touting them or talking about them out of fear of adverse consequence for doing so, and not an ill-founded fear, understandably. I will acknowledge I'm in a job where it's pretty easy to give counsel or say what should or shouldn't be done because I'm not leading a sustainability program. I'm not managing somebody else's money with an ESG mandate. It's very easy to be a cynic or a critic of a phenomenon like that. But if I were in that position, I think I'd be inclined to do a little bit of greenhushing. So that's a real phenomenon. It's also, I don't know how geographically dispersed your audience base is, but it's clearly a very U.S. centric phenomenon for potentially obvious reasons. I mean, the like in this, going back to the finance and ESG group I run within the Trellis network, so far finance has largely meant very specifically dealing with reporting burdens or maybe reporting opportunities, depending how you look at it, but the shifting regulations that underpin that is largely what is taking up the mind and bandwidth of a lot of this profession. I will say also, one of the most read articles on our site last year was a piece by a corporate sustainability lead at a big company who basically was saying, I forget the title, something to the effect of corporate sustainability leads don't want to be accountants. Kind of like, that's not why we got into this job. Part of the role and remit of an ESG controller helps to absolve that, but that's kind of a core theme of corporate sustainability world this year, past year and change, is like, we've been asking for the alphabet soup to be reduced. We've harped on that a fair amount, looking for comparable and consistent information, and the regulatory regime that has now been stood up to support that is kind of burdensome for a lot of practitioners, and the general thinking is like, energy that used to go towards innovation or implementation is now largely usurped by the reporting burden, and there's myriad opinions on whether that's the right direction or not.
What do you think? Do you think there's too much, or just needs to be better designed, or what do you think?
I mean, at the highest level, my thinking is, like, if I'm to get in touch with 75-year-old Grant in the future, should I be lucky to make it that far and look back on, like, what was the point of all this? It seems like when you take your head out of the intra-industry conversations, it is a little bit like, okay, there's X number of companies, not a very large number, X number of companies that are responsible for high percentage number of emissions. Like, do we need such a detailed picture of the problem? And yes, the answer is yes, we do. We need better information, more consistent, comparable information, but the focus on the exact shape and size and breadth and depth of information sometimes does feel pretty abstracted away from the problem that in the end we are trying to solve.
Right.
That's could be picked apart in a million different ways, but that is kind of the underlying feeling that I have about all this, is like, do I feel confident that in X number of decades we're going to look back and go, that made sense that we were so hyper-focused on that level of detail? But at the same time, like, accounting is the language of business, which is another way of saying numbers and money is largely the language of business. So it's quite important to get that right at the same time. So
yeah. You mentioned the role of the ESG comptroller. Well, I haven't heard that. What is that? Is that basically someone dedicated to that kind of reporting?
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, it's a person. I wonder how many Fortune 500 companies have one at this point. I'm sure your PwCs or others out there have good capture of that. But it's a role that started growing pretty dramatically 2-ish years ago. And yeah, it's someone who sits in the corporate finance function. Perhaps they report elsewhere. Each role is not like the other. It's a pretty new role, and it's not entirely clear where they sit. But they are basically the person responsible for reporting ESG information in this new regulatory regime. Sometimes they are someone who's been in, like, corporate controllership their whole life and are just taking on the sustainability remit. Sometimes they're people who are really deeply familiar with ESG information, and that's actually less the case. Usually it's people who are pretty experienced in audit and assurance already and are now taking on this new remit around ESG data. But yeah, I mean, 2.5 years ago, this role didn't exist. And they're taking on a lot of the burden, or again, opportunity, depending how you look on it, of all the reams and reams of sustainability information that's been voluntarily provided over the years. They are getting down to, like, the really core portion of what needs to be reported under CSRD, or, like, if any information around sustainability lands in the 10K, they are responsible for ensuring that information is accurate.
Gotcha.
So
Yeah, that makes sense. Have you heard from your community much about, increased use of AI for that type of data gathering and reporting?
that is, again, one of the better attended Trellis Network sessions recently was one of
Yeah.
the sustainability leads at a big tech company who's got an AI tool for you, talking
Hmm.
about how they are using it in sustainability reporting. And like a lot of use cases of AI, seeing it in real time is both like incredibly promising and a little bit jarring of just
Yeah.
how powerful it is.
Hmm.
But I think there's understandable amount of hesitancy around leaning in too quickly, given that this is a relatively new set of
Yeah.
technological capabilities, and getting it wrong is has some serious consequence in this new, not fully voluntary regime we're in.
Right. Right. Interesting. I want to come back to the green hushing just a little bit, just get your thoughts on like how big a deal do you think that is? Do you think that's really sort of damaging to the movement and progress, or do you think it's sort of fine that the companies are continuing to work away and get what needs to be done, even if they're not talking about it?
Yeah, I mean, it's important that the work is talked about not simply because it's a good thing to talk about, but because a lot of like the challenge of furthering sustainability is around how it gets communicated or whether it gets communicated. So
Hmm.
definitely, I'm not like overwhelmingly concerned by it. It feels like a pretty ephemeral trend. I think other people maybe would disagree with that. I mean, largely also the sustainability function in companies is about communicating the work that is being done. Obviously, the work is the most important thing, but a lot of this boils down to, like I said, around how most of the meetings I've had in my network or kind of core topics that crop up on places like Trellis.net are around the communication of this information. And yes, that's sometimes in regulatory filings, but a lot of this is in more narrative-based communication of what a company's doing.
Hmm.
Um, so it's by no means a good sign, but it's an understandable and understandably short term, I think, trend. If we check back in next year and this were still something we were talking about, I would be a little more concerned. But
Yeah, gotcha. Nice. Let's shift a little bit to some of the key themes that you all cover that the sustainability leads at companies are focused on. In our network, we focus a lot on climate. We focus a lot on addressing inequality broadly. We've been doing more on responsible tech and AI.
hmm.
Biodiversity and natural capital has been a big theme, kind of in the space more broadly. Are those generally the same kind of things where you see your community focusing on more, or are there others?
No, that tracks pretty closely. I mean, a lot of what we are focused on is how companies are making their way towards net zero targets or not making their way towards them.
Hmm.
So maybe we're a little more specifically focused on the ins and outs of net zero target and process to get to said target and all the planning that gets along that path. So like transition plans and all the rest. I think you
Hmm.
touched on every topic that we would touch on most likely. Definitely adaptation and biodiversity and natural capital are things that if we talked a year and a half ago would probably get a brief mention, but now are front and center.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, resiliency and
yeah.
adaptation's been one just in this climate too, where there's just, more politicization of climate change conversations. There's no denying the impacts that the climate's having on communities and businesses and stuff. And so I think that's, for investors, definitely something that's going to be more and more in focus.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah, responsible tech and AI is not, and this could just be like where my attention is going, not the community that we're serving, but less something I've heard about top of mind. Maybe specifically for the corporate sustainability practitioner role, maybe this is not their immediate focus.
Yeah.
I would be curious what your community's focused on within that.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. There's such a realm of potential risks and obviously opportunities, but, on the environmental side with energy use and water use and the like, but a lot more on the social side too, just with human rights, privacy, misinformation, disinformation, which I mean, my sense is probably a lot of corporate sustainability people might not see that kind of thing in their purview quite as much. But yeah, I think, for us, we sort of see it as like the social side of sustainability as important themes. But yeah, it is also new and emerging. We just have sort of a new project on exploring what those risks are for investors or what they might be.
Yeah, fair.
Yeah.
I'm bringing up the climate justice or social themes. I don't know if social hushing is a term, but of course that's been subject to the same form of hush that green hushing has. So I don't know if that affects the investor and asset manager community in the same way it does the corporates who are often the target of, well, probably similar ire they are getting from certain subsets of our political sphere. But
Yeah.
that's definitely an element too.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the value of diversity and equity and inclusion in the corporate level and at the sort of investor level, I think is clear. And I think, investors are definitely wrestling with how to talk about it and how to engage companies on it when they're, kind of subject to these attacks. And I think
Yeah.
a lot of people are looking at how different companies are responding and how they're moving forward. But yeah, that's a big part of the work in our network for sure. And, another thing that's always kind of front and center, as I just mentioned, like looking at all these topics through that lens of financial materiality. And, it kind of relates back to the greenhushing. I think a lot of these strategies are just better business and companies will want to do them for those reasons, if not for the goodwill and branding and marketing reasons as well. But yeah, how have you seen that evolve, or what are the conversations there in terms of just like the financial imperatives for these things in light of these political attacks?
Yeah, I mean, Grant's opinion here, not a representative of Trellis or the people we serve, but it's the standard or the evergreen tension. And again, I don't know if I've been doing this long enough to be able to call something evergreen from my own anecdotal experience observing it, but of course we understand the fundamental business case around like how long-term value is created or destroyed when everything is dependent on a functioning and healthy planet. And that is always coming up in tension against the reality that we are in a short-term focused system where short-term gains are rewarded and long-term considerations are not considered in the way that we would want them to be. So this whole like what seems to be happening now in the corporate sustainability community responding to the headwinds and the kind of reality check we are getting from what is hitting us is, okay, we need to go back to basics, back to the fundamentals. Like everything is about the business case, no fluff, no, there are things with right angles, focus on those. Anything that's round or squishy, get rid of it. And I absolutely understand that impulse. And I also understand that I think that the business case has been what we've been relying on. If I were checking in with this community 5 years ago, I don't think that like at that point it already felt like a lot of the fluff or squish or marketing component, which there's nothing wrong with marketing. That's how you get a product to market, is you market it, and if something that was fluffier and rounder worked to do that, okay. The issue isn't so much that we got the wording wrong or like we need to try a slightly different strategy. Like sure, some of that is true, and I'm sure someone who consults on that topic has a much more lucid and thoughtful way of describing how that needs to change. But that doesn't change the system that you're smashing up against, which is like, and I've heard asset managers say this, where when they say, an asset owner will, and you're in a very specific asset owner category as an endowment, but more generally, like, asset owner will say, we have a long-term target, we are investing for the long term, our beneficiaries, 50 years out, whatever, the whole long-term narrative thinking, and then they will check back in with an asset manager will try to meet that need. And then a quarter will pass, and if there's underperformance in some way, the asset owner will be like, "What's up with that? Why the
the
like,
incentive structure isn't aligned with
exactly
the rhetoric."
Yeah. So I don't love relying on quotes to guide my thinking, but definitely like one of the key takeaways of doing this work so far has been show me the incentive and I'll show you the outcome. As a saying, it's very hard to find a way around that. Another one is maybe like someone can't understand something, their salary depends on them not understanding.
Right.
There's a little bit of that at play always. And there's like, there is some kind of refreshing, in order for this next chapter, whatever this chapter is defined as in this second half of a decisive decade to like work and not have us looking back at 2030 saying, man, we need to shift our wording again or kind of redirect our energy. We did something wrong, is the recognition of like, some things are financially still incentivized to work and some things don't. And like, if you read, for example, the GFAN's commitment at the very last body of text, paragraph is like, by the way, all of this is contingent on us operating in a policy environment where 1.5 degree outcome is possible and financially practical. Or occasionally you get someone from a financial institution, a spokesperson saying like, in a pretty blunt way of like, look, we're a bank and we're still going to do what makes money if it makes money. So like, sorry about that, but also not sorry, because that's why we exist. So us grappling with that is maybe, again, a perennial challenge of this industry.
Yeah, 100%. We talk a lot about that. A lot of the guests on the podcast have brought up similar themes. And as we talk to investors, we're having more conversations around system level investing. So I think that's what's really interesting about investors looking at a whole portfolio, looking at sort of the whole economy of all the things they're invested in, that, some of those short-term profits, if they're externalizing the cost, can actually hurt other companies that they're invested in or hurt the economy as a whole that can erode value. So it's actually not, investors will have a little bit of that perspective as looking at kind of the whole system and then what that means for their fiduciary duty in terms of, asking companies to do things or pushing companies to do things that are actually going to help the health of the whole economy and other companies and not just themselves.
One of my hopes for 2030 is that the term systems level investing is not familiar just to some nerds in the corners of sustainable finance, but that's like, part of just the general parlance of how we address sustainable finance going forward, because that's kind of captures the crux of this whole thing of, this is like essentially one massive externality that has to be internalized if we're to continue to function in the long term. So I hope that,
Yeah, exactly. And I've been encouraged the last year or so, even the last few months, it has seemed like, the shareholder commons and the investment integration project or TIP have been kind of banging the drum on this stuff for several years. And it seems like it's, making some good jumps into the more mainstream conversation, or at least the mainstream sustainable investing conversations. But I agree, that's a good goal. All right. Well, Grant, we got a few final questions before we jump into those. Anything else you wanted to cover that we haven't really touched on?
No, I think I'm ready for your quick take questions.
All right, let's do it. So what is the most exciting thing happening right now in terms of corporate sustainability that you're seeing?
I'm going to riff off of what I just kind of was ending there with, which was a refresh on making this core business case, getting honest about what works and what doesn't, maybe like coming to a clear understanding that win-wins are awesome, and a lot of like the business world is built on the concept of a win-win being attainable, but like the recognition that there are some challenges or sacrifices made in this process of getting to sustainability as an outcome that aren't going to be so cleanly categorized as win-win. That's a hard case to make when you work in a company. Easy for me to say, I realize, but I think that recognition of reality is going to set us up well.
Yeah, definitely needed. How about a book, podcast, article that people interested in the space or students might like that you'd recommend?
Future of Finance. Not listening. What are you doing?
There you go.
I will say you said one, but I'm gonna expand a little bit. So I do mean that. I've got a rotation of podcasts that I always give a chance in my podcast feed. This is now one of them, so well done.
Well, thank you.
And the newsletter front, I will say FT's Moral Money group is kind of an essential. I think it's bi-weekly newsletter. I make sure to never miss that. An industry voice is really interesting and has a more nuanced take on what is the flavor of the month in this space is a guy named Matt Sequel, has a newsletter called the ESG Advocate. I think it's through Substack. Definitely another one that when I see come in the inbox and see the subject line, I jump on it.
Cool.
And one article I will say that is kind of like seminal reading, it feels like, and has enduring impact, is a guy called Ken Pucker, who was the COO of Timberland, the shoe company, and is now a professor at Tufts. He wrote a piece in Harvard Business Review in 2021, and I think it's called Confusing Output with Impact. But if you look up HBR 2021, his article, and it's still just like an enduring kind of underpinning question in this whole architecture we're building around sustainability reporting of not conflating the production of the infrastructure to share the information with the impact it does or doesn't create. And it's really good reading.
Yeah, nice. Awesome. Those are great ones. And can't leave out Trellis, obviously, too.
Trellis done that. Start there. Yeah, start there. Then go to Future Finance. Got my priorities all mixed up. Yeah.
Nice. And then how about outside of work when you're not thinking about all these topics? What might we find you doing?
Oh man, I'm a mono hobbyist. I surf, and I don't feel like I have a lot of time to try other things because I just want to be in the ocean. So you will find me in the ocean, either Pacifica here along the coast, Rockaway is the next beach, or Ocean Beach in San Francisco is where you'll probably find me early morning or evening. In the past, you'd find me playing a banjo, and then COVID hit, and I never picked it up again. So maybe one day that'll happen again.
Was it COVID overload? You just had too much of it during COVID? Or?
I don't know. It seemed like people who played instruments when COVID hit, either people got really into it and didn't put it down, or they just didn't touch it for some reason. And I'm unfortunately in that camp. Or I'm just trying to make up two camps to justify why I'm in that camp and stopped. But yeah.
Well, hopefully you'll get back into it. But if you're going to have one hobby, surfing's a pretty good one.
It is.
Nice. All right, so these are our final two questions we ask everybody, but given your work and how you see what's happening in the space, what's your vision for the future of finance if we're going to work this out?
My future prediction of the future of finance is that reason will prevail to some degree. Like I'm hearing the phrase, it's easier to imagine the end of the world than the end of capitalism. And I don't know where to take that thought, but I think that there is some inevitability to the work we do. And I don't want to say that that means like, we can just coast and eventually things will work out, but there is like an inevitable intersection that has to happen for this system to be sustained. And that looks like, building the world that we are trying to build. And so I have no way to not think that that's where we'll get. So the future of finance is perhaps bright, but not immediately.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's how I tend to see it too. And recognizing that, like you said, it doesn't just happen. It happens because of all the work so many people are doing to make it happen.
Yeah.
Nice. And then how about for, college students or young people looking to get into the field, aside from signing up for the Trellis Network newsletters, what kind of advice would you give them?
Obviously start there. You'll miss out big time if you don't. I love that question. First, I will say be kind to yourself because there's never any risk in doing that. It never hurts, especially when you're young and entering the world that always seems like it linearly made sense for everybody else, but trust me, it didn't. It always makes sense when you look back. You can explain how A led to B and B led to C, but when you're on A going to B and B going to C, it's not that clear. So if you're feeling like that, everyone else got a guide on how to live life and you're kind of like missing the guide, it's all good. No one got it. On the job front, so yeah, I'm 33 and I graduated college 10 or 11 years ago. So I've got a decade-ish experience post being that young person you're mentioning. I would say don't rush to getting a job with the title and the remit that you think you want right away. Like there does seem to be a lot, especially in this world where like the business case is getting uber sharpened and refined. Maybe your first job is not the thing called sustainable finance analyst or something that you kind of saw yourself in terms of working in sustainability. There might be a couple steps before that are going to allow you to refine your kind of operational skill set that's not directly tied to sustainability, but you will use later when you're in that sustainability role, which maybe is not what you want to hear when your goal is to go straight into a job that's called sustainability.
So that makes sense. I definitely had those fits and starts in different directions and had some roles that were not sustainability that definitely helped build into this. So that's great stuff. Nice. Well, Grant, it's been so good to catch up, and thanks again for your time and for the great work you all are doing. And hopefully I'll see you in person one of these days soon at one of your events.
I love it. I hope to. Sounds good, George. Thanks for having me over.
Take care.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Thanks for tuning in for the Future of Finance podcast. We hope you found today's conversation insightful and inspiring. Don't forget to subscribe or follow us on your favorite podcast platform. And please take a moment to rate, review, or share the show. All of this really helps us to reach more people like you who care about creating a thriving and sustainable future. And it's a really easy way to have a big impact. So please do follow. A quick disclaimer, the content of this podcast is for informational purposes only and does not constitute investment advice. Investments and strategies discussed may not be suitable for all listeners. Please consult a financial, legal, tax, or accounting professional before making any investment decisions. References to managers and funds are for informational purposes only and should not be considered endorsements or investment solicitations. This podcast does not monitor fund performance or guarantee the accuracy of third-party materials or statements. This has been an episode of the Future of Finance podcast, exploring how finance can shape a vibrant and sustainable future. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.